This is Darren with rebootcongress.blogspot.com, and today I'm talking with Star Parker. Star is the president of CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, and a nationally syndicated columnist. You can find her on the internet at starparker.com. Star, I met you in mid-August at the Sherman T. Parker Awards Banquet here in St. Louis. That banquet was part of the Meet Me in St. Louis conference hosted by MoveOnUp.org. Move On Up is a network of African American conservatives, and at that banquet, Martin Baker, who's an African American in the St. Louis area, announced his candidacy for Congress. He's actually running in the 1st Congressional District in Missouri, which is the seat currently held by Lacey Clay. I'm wondering, what is your take on Martin's candidacy for Congress, and do you remember the banquet? What are some of your memories from that?
The banquet was absolutely amazing. I loved coming to St. Louis. In fact, I'll be coming again for another opportunity. But when you think about doing educational scholarships, when you think about black conservatives who are unifying themselves to say enough is enough, when you think about the long-term goals for the St. Louis area and beyond for the black conservatives that are there to start teaming up to become almost what the Buffalo Soldiers were in the history of this country to the military, becoming for the Tea Party like the Black Patriots, similar to that time in our history when we knew that the left will use race and racial division at any point they can to further their agenda. And so when you ask me about the candidate, what has happened in our country is we have tremendously divided into two countries. We have one makers, one takers. We have a situation where half the country lives free and half the country lives government dependent. We can't go on like this. It's obvious in all national discussions that we have reached that critical tipping point that we can no longer go on like this. We're spending money we don't have. We're expanding government beyond recognition, and people are getting tremendously crushed by this. The neighborhoods that are hardest hit are the neighborhoods that are the most at risk when you expand the heavy hand of government and when you expand heavy regulation. So during this last election cycle, the American people spoke up, mostly through the Tea Parties, and said, we are not going to go on like this anymore. You are going to, government, come into some kind of order and start limiting your scope consistent with the Constitution. So the American people replaced 25% of the United States Congress to get this message through into law, into public policy. The only areas that did not get one change of the guard are these hard-hit communities, these at-risk communities where you have 41 Congressional Black Caucus members who have been representing those communities for the last 50 years, locking arms with the hard left and getting absolutely nothing done. Amidst them watching their communities unravel, families collapse, unemployment now has skyrocketed. So I welcome that energy that is pushing forth a black conservative agenda in these hard-hit communities.
What do you think a candidate like Martin Baker needs to do in order to gain traction in these communities? And more importantly, how does he recruit volunteers to get out there and get out the vote and just get his message out in these communities?
He needs to engage his story with the community. He needs to tell his community why he believes what he believes. We know from polling data that a third of African Americans agree with the right. 1/3, polling after polling after polling for 20 years says that they are evangelical and conservative. So the first order of business for Martin is to find his constituents, identify those in the community that 3 in 10 that agree with him so that he can build an army. The second thing he needs to do is go into the churches that represent these thirds. Of the 45,000 black churches in the country, 10% are evangelical and conservative. 10% poll year after year with the right. So he needs to identify in his community, if 1 in 10 black churches is a conservative black church, he needs to find them. And he needs to find them and build them up so that he will have an army, a core constituency, not just an army when it comes to the pastor, but he will have his captains, he will have his lieutenants, he will have his officers so that they can make a difference in that community. Then third, he needs to go into that community through every source available through that constituency of the people, the constituency of the pastors, and the constituencies of the media and tell his story, why he believes what he believes, and talk about ideas that are going to break the cycle of government dependency and break the cycle of poverty in these hard-hit neighborhoods.
Martin Baker is an active member of the Tea Party in the St. Louis area. And earlier in October, President Obama came to town. He actually visited with a recipient of some of the stimulus funding, the Congressman Russ Carnahan's brother, Tom Carnahan, who lives in St. Louis. At that fundraiser dinner that President Obama attended, kind of in response to that, there was a Tea Party rally held across the street in Forest Park. Martin Baker was there, and towards the end of the night, it was getting kind of dark. You'd mentioned earlier that the left will use race to divide us, and we saw that sort of racial tension build with racial epithets thrown at Martin. I guess I'm curious, like, this story seems like the sort of thing that should make national news, and yet it doesn't. And I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, there's no place for it to make national news because the national news, the national media is controlled by AP and the left. So a story that spotlights that a black conservative has been, defamed is not going to make their radar. They're the ones that are trying to keep the status quo. They're the ones that are trying to keep these communities victims of the hard left so that they can do their social engineering. What Martin has to do is ignore it. He has to build out the same strategies that Dr. King and others used to further their agenda during the Civil Rights era. They just ignore it. They were called all kind of names. They were water hosed down. They kept marching. What he needs to do is keep focused. My pastor told me something a long time ago when I first got pushed out into this national spotlight of media and having to debate with and deal with the hard left. I've done an interview with what some people are recalling that one I did on The View, but with and having to sit between Joy Behar and Barbara Walters for an hour, but also with Jesse. You name the hard left, whether it's Al Sharpton and others, I've debated them. But the reason that now I'm able to stay focused is because my pastor told me something early on when I thought that they were needing to be answered back, when I was screaming and hollering with them, when I thought that if they say tit, I'm saying tat. He said, you're not talking to them. You're talking to those that want to hear from you. The millions of people that are sitting on their couch waiting to hear truth. Just tell your story, why you believe what you believe. So what Martin's going to have to do is ignore the fact that he is going to be opposed, especially in joining with the Tea Party and being a part of that movement in America that's saying we can't go on like this anymore. He's going to have to keep moving forward like the Buffalo Soldiers did. He's going to have to start identifying with their role in American history to go before our military as the champions of these ideas that were going to keep us a free and wholesome nation.
In those sorts of verbal attacks, are there things that you, as an African American leader, have found solace in when you're under attack, when you're under assault? What can you do to sort of kind of reinforce yourself?
Remind myself of the scripture. One, you're not alone. I mean, when I just read this morning where Elijah had to be reminded, you're not alone. God had to tell him, no, I have 7,000 men who haven't bowed to Baal. It looked like he was all alone. And now Jezebel's after him, and he had mighty victories, but he thought he was alone. We're not alone. A third of African Americans agree with Martin. They might not tell you. They come whisper it at the family reunion. They're not going to say it to the media camera, but they're winking at us. I was just the other day here in Washington, D.C., riding in a taxi, and the taxi driver, he asked me where I was going. I told him, and you could tell by where I was going that it was a part of what we consider the right. And he just started talking about how Barack Obama reminds him of the dictators in Africa and how him and his family escaped all that. And now they're sitting in this regime again. They don't. And next thing I know, I'm at this meeting, and it happens to be at the same building where FEMA is located, and this African-American woman comes running out after me, screaming, screaming. And, I have to be very watchful because I've got a lot of enemies in this city. I know that. I know that my life could be threatened any time. We had bombs scared our office and, not after me directly, but this is becoming a very sensitive work. And she was coming screaming at me, but she was a fan. She was coming screaming at me saying, Starbar, oh my goodness, I can't believe you're just walking down the hall. I love you. Keep going. We're listening. We hear you. There are a lot of us out here, and they are. And what Martin has to do is remind himself that there are more with him than against him. They just are quiet. They need him because he's the leader. He is the only one that's willing to go into that hard part of St. Louis and say, no, enough of this. How long are we going to allow for the madness of this social engineering, this vulgar expansion of the welfare state that gives us the ugly appearance of government dependency that is destroying entire communities, unraveling families, absolutely killing our offspring? I mean, the abortion rate keeps on in the black community at the current rates. There won't be any African Americans in this community. So, yes, he needs to just keep his voice solid, keep his voice focused, and keep reminding himself that there are more with him. And every now and then he's going to get a letter from one of them. And every now and then he's going to get an encouragement from somebody that he didn't expect to get it from. But the great mission is not whether he gets to feel comfortable, that he's in a work that's not going to give you that solace. He's in a work where you're going to feel often alone.